attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everybody, this is Vanessa Quick with the National Down Syndrome Society. Welcome and thank you for joining us for our July edition of the NDSS Webinar Series. We are very fortunate to have Cheryl Jorgensen here, who is going to present on Presuming Competence Every Day in the Classroom. And just a few things before we get going. The webinar is being recorded, so that if you have to leave at some point or want to share this information with friends or listen again, it will be posted on our website, which is ndss.org, and we'll get that up online as soon as possible after the webinar. We also have some supplemental handouts that Cheryl has provided for us that will be posted as well. We will be doing a question and answer period at the end of the presentation here. So everybody is on mute during Cheryl's presentation. But if you have a question, there's a box on your screen where you can type it in, and just type that in at any point. And if we have time, we are going to do our best to get that answered. So with that, let's turn it over to Cheryl. Cheryl, thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Thank you, Vanessa. I'm pleased to be here as well. I'm coming to you from the state of New Hampshire, and for, 26 years, I worked at the Institute on Disability at the University of New Hampshire, which is a research and advocacy organization. And my work focused on inclusion of students with Down syndrome and other disabilities in general education classes. I sort of semi-retired 2 years ago, but find that I'm busier than ever. And doing webinars like this is one way that I continue to be connected with families and with professionals in the field. So thank you for the invitation. I will be going rather quickly because I only have about 45 minutes to present, and we'll do our best at the end to answer questions. So if you have a question, please, again, type it in the chat window. Just type and hit enter, or make a note of them, and you can ask them at the end. So in 1970, which is actually the year I graduated from high school, the possibilities for people with Down syndrome were very limited. Adults, young adults, older adults with Down syndrome, their work opportunities were limited to sheltered workshops. Oftentimes people with Down syndrome and other developmental disabilities, their only options for living after they left their families was in congregate settings. There were schools devoted entirely to children with Down syndrome and people with other disabilities. And maybe in the beginning of 1970s, mid-1970s, opportunities began to expand, but still work opportunities for adults with Down syndrome were pretty limited to the sort of stereotypical working at the fast food restaurant. In 2013, today, the possibilities are much broader and much more attuned to the unique interests that each person with Down syndrome has. So students, children with Down syndrome, are actively involved in their religious communities. Students with Down syndrome can graduate from high school. They can go on to post-secondary education. After they get out of college or after they get out of high school, they can not only work in fast food, in housekeeping, in horticulture, but they can work in businesses. They can be politically active. As I'm sure you know, many adults with Down syndrome are very active in advocating for policies and legislation, both within their states and at the federal level. the world of acting and the arts is open for people with Down syndrome. And then the opportunity to find a life partner and establish a family of your own is a possibility for people with Down syndrome. So, of course, the question that's relevant for this webinar is, how do we help students realize these possibilities? And I believe that there are sort of two very connected and intertwined things that we need to do in order to help each and every student with Down syndrome have a great typical school experience and then an enviable life. And those two things are to presume students' competence and to include them in general education. So when I say this term presume competence, I want to break that down a little bit because it really means some very specific things. I think we all are used to that phrase, oh, we need to have high expectations for everyone. But presuming competence to me means very specifically to presume that students are competent to fully participate in general education instruction, in a general education classroom, and competence to learn the general education curriculum. The second meaning of presuming competence is to presume that all students can communicate in ways that are commensurate, on par with their same-age peers without disabilities. I believe that we need to presume that students are competent to fully participate in age-appropriate social activities and to make and sustain reciprocal social relationships that are based on each person choosing people with whom they want to be friends and spend time, and reciprocal in terms of the student or the adult with Down syndrome not always being on the receiving end of help or charity. And then presuming competence to graduate from high school, college, and be college and career ready. So the research says that students' academic achievement, their communication skills, the quality of their social relationships, and their post-school outcomes, the degree to which they're living in inclusive settings in the community, they're maximally independent, have financial means, and have a wide and deep set of relationships. All of those outcomes, which are outcomes that we would have for our children who don't have Down syndrome, are positively correlated, positively related to the amount of time that students spend in a general education classroom. And the next slide that I'm going to show you really depicts kind of the relationships between this idea of presuming competence, participating in general education, and those adult outcomes. So let me kind of walk this through you. I tend to like to present information in lots of different ways because I mean, I really like graphics. To me, they tell a very rich picture. So in my view, and again, this is just sort of my personal and professional opinion, that presuming students' competence and acting in ways that really help students show their competence, and the term we use for that is to construct students' competence, is the is the foundation. It's the big circle in which everything else fits. So with a really strong foundation of presumed competence, with actions that families and professionals take to help students depict their competence, the next essential element of a high-quality education that will lead to those good outcomes is that students are full-time, welcomed, expected I like that term, expected members of a general education classroom with reciprocal social relationships. For many years, I've used the phrase that I think all students should be welcomed into general education. I think that parents should not have to fight every year in order for their students to be welcomed into their neighborhood schools. And recently a colleague of mine, who actually is a parent of a young adult with Down syndrome, said that she's begun using this term, expected. She thinks and she hopes that not only are students welcomed, but they're expected to be there. So if they're not there, teachers, other team members, principals should say, why aren't they? Our classroom is not complete unless we have a real diversity of students, including students with Down syndrome. So foundation is presuming competence. Next, membership is an essential element for high-quality education. The next element, or the next core feature of a high-quality education for all students, including those with Down syndrome, is what's called a universally designed curriculum or universally designed instruction. And I'll be giving you some very specific examples of how teachers and other team members can work together to make the curriculum and the day-to-day classroom instruction accessible for all students. And that's what that term, universally designed, means. So again, we're sort of building on foundations. There are some students, and some of them who may be students with Down syndrome, who need us to pay particular attention to some individualized supports that students need in order for them to participate in universally designed instruction. And those supports could be in the area of academics, or they could be in other areas such as social supports, sensory supports, emotional supports, certainly communication supports. And then in order for all of those elements or all of those core factors to work together, what we know is that people need to, all members of a student's team need to work together frequently, collaboratively. There needs to be administrative leadership from the superintendent to the principal to the special education director. And then certainly there need to be enough resources. Resources meaning time for people to meet, to plan instruction, which is often a scarce resource in school. Technology resources, not only for students themselves, but for their teachers, accessible teaching materials. So with that sort of framework, let me now go down a little deeper and help us sort of fine-tune our microscope to figuring out, well, if we have this value of presuming students' competence, what does that really look like every day in the classroom? So I want to talk about that, one of those first circles of effective practices, and that's this circle of membership. And as I have spent time in classrooms, not only in New Hampshire, but, oh gosh, I don't know how many states I've been in, at least probably 3/4 of them over the past 30 years or so. I feel as if I have kind of in my brain or as a checklist a number of really observable indicators that if these are present, if I can see these happening in the classroom, then it lets me know that this sort of amorphous concept of membership may actually be happening for students with Down syndrome. So the first one is that students attend the school that they would attend if they did not have a disability. Some people call that a neighborhood school. Some people call that a home school. You know, in some larger cities, children from certain neighborhoods, all children, may be either bused to other neighborhoods or there may be a school choice. But the key point here is that students with Down syndrome attend the school that their brothers and sisters attend, that their neighbors attend, the school that they would attend if they didn't have the disability. Second membership indicator is that students are members of an age-appropriate general education classroom. They're not simply visitors or special friends in that classroom. Maybe a resource that, that Vanessa could look up and post on the website, or at least a link to it, is there's a wonderful research study that was done, oh gosh, back in the early 90s. And it was about a student with Down syndrome named Peter, who was in a special ed class, but he would occasionally come into a general ed class for certain times of the day. And the paper is called Peter ... He Comes and Goes. And it's a really interesting research paper that shows how other students view students with disabilities who are kind of not really there all the time, but again, they come and go. When I go into a general ed class, I want to make sure that I see all students' names. They're on the class list. They're in the, you know, the sort of lists of, you know, learning groups that are posted on the bulletin board or on the chalkboard. They have jobs in the classroom like other students. Another membership indicator is a little bit more about how services are delivered to students. So when I see a student with Down syndrome in a general ed classroom, what I like to see that tells me that student is really a member of that class is that support services are brought into the classroom. So the speech pathologist comes into the classroom and joins whatever learning and teaching activity is going on and supports the student's use of language within those groups. Occupational therapists come into the classroom and help figure out the kinds of seating and positioning and writing or typing tools that students need in order for them to fully participate. Special educators or reading specialists come into the classroom and work with small groups of students. They might lead whole lessons, or they might sit right next to a student with Down syndrome and provide some personalized instruction to the student, but it's all within the context of what the general education teacher is teaching. I definitely want to see students with Down syndrome receiving the same or similar materials as students without disabilities, with, of course, the accommodations or adaptations that are needed in order to make those materials accessible to that student. It's pretty disheartening when I go into a classroom and I, see the teacher passing out papers and she skips over a student with Down syndrome. Perhaps because the team hasn't had time to prepare materials for that student. So when I see that student being called up to the board, arriving in class at the same time, having a locker or a cubby, riding the same school bus as his classmates without disabilities, those are all indicators of membership. So the second way that we can really presume that students are competent to be part of everything that's going on in the school, competent to learn, competent to communicate, is to make sure that students have the supports they need to fully participate in general education instruction in the general ed classroom. Another thing that's kind of very disheartening is when I go into a classroom that people believe is an inclusive classroom, but I see students with disabilities off to the side, in the back of the room, working on separate curriculum. That to me is inclusion in name only, but it's not really being part of everything else that's going on in the classroom. So what do I want to see that tells me that this student is fully participating? It's pretty straightforward. I want to see the students participating in all the same kinds of academic and other activities that students without disabilities are participating in. From the Pledge of Allegiance, the lunch count, the errands, eating lunch in the cafeteria, being a member of the school play, going on field trips, participating in community service activities, participating in extracurricular activities. And then certainly, and here's this last bullet point on the slide, participating in all of the different kinds of instructional routines or instructional activities as students without disabilities. So I want to see students participating in whole class discussions, going up to the board and writing, working in small groups, and definitely being called on the teacher to give answers. I would certainly want to see students with Down syndrome completing assignments and other work products, again, with adaptations and modifications that are similar to those of students without disabilities. And then the last, this is just a sampling of participation indicators, but the last one's really important. Many of you may know that in the late 1970s, it became a common practice for students with disabilities, once they reached middle or high school, to leave the school building for a part or most of their school day to do community learning experiences. In an inclusive school where students with Down syndrome are fully a part of everything, students are in school up through the 12th grade, and then between the ages of 18 and 21, they are at job sites, they're doing job shadowing, they're learning how to navigate the community, or they're going to college, much in the same, or working, much in the same way as their classmates without disabilities. And I have experience in working and consulting with families and educators of students with Down syndrome who really, of course, value all of those kind of early job and early career experiences, but they find opportunities for students to participate in them while they're in school in the same ways that students without disabilities do. So kids have summer jobs. I worked with a student named Brandon who had Down syndrome, and from 9th to 12th grade, he held a summer job alongside a classmate who did not have a disability. One year they worked for a local painter, and while Brandon learned important work skills like showing up on time and filling out your time card, he also learned some really valuable lessons about, like, what do you talk about in the van on the way to the job site? How do you order your lunch at McDonald's? What do you do during break time? So a full participation indicator to me is when high school students, they learn in those outside of school environments in ways that are very similar to their classmates who don't have disabilities. So the full participation indicators sound great, but the devil is in the details. So I want to sort of shift into the part of the presentation where I talk about just a few, and again, in 45 minutes, I'm only able to kind of sample what some strategies are. But I want to talk with you about some very specific tools and strategies for providing students with access to instruction and instructional materials. And when I say the word access, I'm really using it as a very broad term. So the standard is that we want to make sure that every student in the classroom can see the materials, can hear the instruction, they're able to access print materials through reading, through listening, they're able to access science materials by manipulating those materials, and so on. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the federal special education law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, has a very specific requirement about accessible instructional materials. And I've put the exact quote up here because I think maybe people are not aware of this. And whether you are in this webinar as a family member or as a professional, you might share this information with other members of students' teams. So IDEA says, in order to meet its responsibility, and this is its meaning each state, to ensure that children with disabilities who need instructional materials in accessible formats are provided those materials in a timely manner. Every state, and usually it's the State Department of Education, must ensure that all public agencies, meaning schools, take all reasonable steps to provide instructional materials in accessible formats to children with disabilities who need those materials at the same time as other children receive their instructional materials. So as I go on with the slides, I'd be really interested if you would just enter a little comment in the chat window that lets us know, number one, were you aware that that was part of IDEA? And is it your experience that accessible instructional materials are provided to students with Down syndrome at the same time those materials are provided to other students? So I'd like to share with you, and would you excuse me for a moment? I need to check the time, so I'm just going to pop out of PowerPoint for a second. Okay, it's 1:28. Okay, I'm going to share with you a number of accessible text resources. So the first is what's called an aided, AIDED, language board. And Vanessa, am I okay? Are you seeing the slides? Would you just either let me know by writing in the chat or let me know audibly? I kind of went in and out of my PowerPoint there for a second. I want to make sure that people can still see it.
Sure, I'm seeing the slides. It's not full screen, but I'm seeing aided language board.
Okay. It's not full screen, did you say?
No.
Oh, all right. Let me try to make it so. Hold on one sec. Is this better?
There you go. Looks
Excellent,
good.
thanks. Sorry for the delay. So an aided language board is a tool that can be used to support students having receptive access to what is being talked about in the classroom, and it can be used as a communication device. So in this example, an aided language board was created for a ninth grade English class that was they were reading Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare, and to sort of enhance students' understanding of Shakespeare, which is kind of deep, the students watched the movie West Side Story. So the special education teacher created this aided language board, and the yellow-coded pictures and words at the top are characters. In the next row, in the green blocks are action words or verbs. The next row is emotions. The orange row is different events or different things that happened in the movie, and so on. And this aided language board can be done obviously for a movie, it can be done for a book, and a printed version of the board is given, it can be given to all the students, but certainly the student with Down syndrome, and it provides not only the words, that sort of most important words that are being talked about during the discussion of the book, but it has the visual or the picture support. And if students are asked a question about, you know, do you remember who the two star-crossed lovers were, and the student with Down syndrome or another disability has trouble retrieving that information from their brain, then the aided language board can prompt them by showing a picture and a word that goes together. So that's one example of a strategy for supporting students to have full access and participation in instruction. Another strategy, and I'm going to talk a lot more about this if we have time, is to provide students with an adapted or rewritten version of a book that all students are reading. So I worked with a student named Peter, again another Peter, and their 5th grade classroom was reading a book called Maniac McGee, and the language was too difficult for him. So his team wanted him to not just listen to other kids reading the book, not just listen to the book on tape, but to have something to read. So the speech-language pathologist rewrote the book to about the 1st, early 2nd grade reading level and enhanced some of the key vocabulary with symbols. They made sure that when they rewrote the book, it still had all the major, you know, characters and events in the original story. There are thousands, and I mean thousands, of resources that have already been created by other families and teachers. And I'm not going to actually click out to all of these links, but I just wanted to show you that if you start searching in Google, you can type in whatever the book is, or whatever the topic area is that you would like to find accessible or adapted resources. You can then type the plus sign and the words adapted materials, adapted lessons, adapted resources. So To Kill a Mockingbird plus adapted materials will yield just a wealth of information. Chapter summaries, digital read-aloud versions, rewritten text in PowerPoint format, iPad and iPhone summaries of the book. There are speech pathologists and special ed teachers who have created board maker displays for students who use augmentative communication in many, many popular books and popular subject areas. So you know, in education, we tend to want to recreate the wheel, but I would urge you, if you know that there are going to be some kind of key books or subject areas that are going to be taught in this next school year, start looking for those adapted resources right now. And before you start creating your own and, you know, getting all involved in laminating and cutting out symbols, check what's already out there, and I will bet that you will find many, many resources. So I want to briefly mention 10 technology tools that in the last couple of years, I have used with teachers and with families, and I've chosen these. You know, there are, again, thousands to choose from. It's so hard to know what to pick. I've chosen these because they are either free or very low cost, and they don't require having a master's degree in assistive technology to learn how to use them. Again, let me check my time, and I'm good. So I'm going to show you first this tool called Auto Summarize. Don't know if you've ever heard of it, but I'm going to go outside PowerPoint here and get us to the website and show you how it's used. So while it would be wonderful if every piece of text that teachers used with students were available in multiple reading levels, it's just not the case. So there are a variety of free websites that will do text summarizing for you. And let me show you how this one works. So I went to Wikipedia and I just downloaded some text about the Civil War. And I copied that text. And on this particular site, I paste the text into the box, and then I tell the Auto Summarize tool how many sentences I would like the summary to be. And I click, and so I picked 8. So Auto Summarize, here is 3 paragraphs, 500 words worth of information summarized in 8 sentences. There are other tools in which you can also modify the vocabulary, and even though this 8-sentence version might not be the perfect adapted version for an individual student, it really helps team members with a starting place. It distills large sections of text into something that's more manageable, not only for the team if they need to do further adaptations, but for the students. Okay, so let me go back to the PowerPoint. So the next tool I'd like to share with you is one of the newer versions of a tool that used to be available and is not any longer, and it's called Writing with Symbols. So let's go out to the website. And this is an app by the Attainment Company, and this one does cost $60, but that's actually cheaper than many of the other versions. And it's called Symbol Support App. It's available for both Android and Apple products, iPads, just regular laptop computers, Android phones. And it's an app where as you type words, a symbol pops up into the display. And you can customize it for not every word, keywords, and so on. But that's my favorite writing with symbols application right now. There are many, many read aloud apps where you can read any piece of text that is on a laptop, that's on an iPad, and the link that I've provided in the PowerPoint. And Vanessa, I hope you'll make the PowerPoint document available to folks as well, yes, so they can just get the link. Yeah, then 2 really interesting websites that I want to share with you are Khan Academy, and I'm going to pop on that right now. And Khan Academy, and many of these resources really have nothing to do with special education, but they are websites that provide instruction using animations. So on the Khan Academy website, I'm going to type in subtraction with, if I can type, remainders and see what I come up with. All right, subtracting mixed numbers. So let's just watch if this will show the video on the internet, a little bit of this video.
In order to subtract subtract these two numbers and simplify the answer and write as a mixed number. We're going to do it two ways. The first way, we're going to turn both of these into improper fractions and see what we get. And then the other way, we're going to subtract the whole number parts and then subtract the fraction parts and see what we get. So if we turn them both into improper fractions, let's first turn 8 2/3 into an improper fraction. So it has 3 in the denominator, and 3 times 8 is 24. 24 plus 2 is 26. So,
okay, so that's just a real brief glimpse of Khan Academy. And there are instructional videos from everything from subtraction up to astrophysics. What I really like about them is how visual they are. And there are a number of websites that have visual instructional animated videos. And the other one that I like is called BRAINPOP. And BRAINPOP is a website that has some parts of the website are free, and you'll see a box right here called BRAINPOP Educators, and then some parts cost something. So let me see if I can show you a sample animation from the free part of the site. Okay. So actually, this is going to be my my subscription, which costs me $99 a year. So what's really cool about BRAINPOP is that they have organized their animated instructional videos based on the Common Core standards. So you can click Common Core standards by your state standards or by the national standards. And let's look at a language arts lesson at the first grade level. Okay. And I probably should have had this done before the webinar. But let's see if I can get one up real quick to show you. All righty. Okay, Greek gods lesson plan, learning about Greek mythology. What fun. Within each BRAINPOP animation, there are learning objectives. There are often graphic organizers, sample projects, sample extension activities. And now let me find the video, which I can't find in this lesson. Okay, rather than take your time to search in this, and I apologize for not having the lesson popped up, I would encourage you to search the BRAINPOP Educator site, which of course is for families as well, and see some of the really cool animations that they have. And even though I find some of the animated characters, like this little guy up in the right-hand corner, a little bit corny, I have found that all the way up through middle school, students don't seem to think that they're corny. So check that out as a resource. All right, many other potential technology tools. One called Video Scheduler, which is a wonderful kind of a student schedule book that the students can use on an iPhone or a smartphone or on an iPad. And it helps students to enter assignments when they're due, to record social activities or, team sport practices. And there are a lot of picture enhancements within this scheduler. And it's a really fun app. And I think it can be appropriate for students, gosh, probably from 4th grade up on through, college, to help build those kind of self-monitoring, self-determination skills. There are a variety of either Apple or Android apps that help students or their team members create individualized, adapted books. And I would urge you to check out those apps. And so the one last app that I'm going to show you is called Thinking Blocks. And let's cross our fingers. Ooh, great, that I popped right up to a video. So Vanessa, are you able to see the screen that says finding a fraction of a number?
Finding a fraction of a number. Yes. Yes,
Awesome. Let's see if you can actually see the video that I'm going to play. And I'll do it whole screen.
In this video, we're going to model and solve a word problem in which we're asked to find a fraction of a number. Katie is writing a
Okay, it appears that this website doesn't like that I'm working in a webinar platform, but let me just describe to you what this does. This particular website, again, it has animations, math problem animations, both word problems and non-word problems that make visible different math operations. I think that this is a really nice teaching tool for teachers who are introducing a lesson. It could be incorporated into a math station. So, you know, students are rotating through various stations throughout a math learning block. It could be used as a review for an individual student. Really, it's free, very user-friendly, unless you're working in a webinar. Oh, and the last one I want to mention to you, it's called See, Touch, Learn, a great Apple app for creating flashcards with really great visuals as well as either, you know, math problems or vocabulary problems. As I'm kind of winding down here towards our Q&A period, I want to address the issue, switch gears from talking about presuming competence by providing students with access to instruction to presuming competence that all students can communicate. And I believe that not providing students with a way to communicate about everything that's going on around them, everything academic as well as everything social, is probably one of the greatest barriers that currently exists for students with Down syndrome and students with other disabilities. And I am unfortunately in meetings sometimes when people say things like, well, we can't provide that student with an augmentative means of communication because he's not ready, because he doesn't understand the vocabulary, because he already speaks a little bit and we don't want to inhibit his oral speech. And the latest research on best practices in augmentative communication say that students need a way to communicate even before we know what the student knows, even before students are proficient communicators, even before they can show cause and effect, before they can show symbolic understanding, even if they're judged to be severely anything. There are communication supports, including particular augmentative communication devices that can not only give students to communicate about the things that they already know, but it can enhance their learning of literacy, of social conventions, of turn-taking, of everything. So if any of you are in the position of having a child or a student who is not meeting his communication needs using oral language, then that student really needs to have some sort of augmentative communication support. And I use this slide as an example. I mean, if these words and these messages are the only thing that are accessible to students, how in the world are they ever going to show us they know who was the 16th president, if in fact they do know that? there are no prerequisites to students having communication devices that can enable them to communicate about age-appropriate subjects, age-appropriate topics. All students may not be able to use this particular display, but all students need access to rich vocabulary. So in conclusion, and before we open it up to questions, I think that there are 5 really compelling reasons why we should presume that all students are competent and why we should provide them with the learning opportunities and supports based on that presumption of competence. And the first reason is that when teachers expect students to do well, they do. And when teachers do not expect students to do well, then students tend to meet our low expectations, to say it quite simply. Another argument for me about why we should presume each and every student's competence is that assessments and IQ tests and, all the kinds of testing that we do with students with Down syndrome and other disabilities too often measure what students can't do rather than give us some insight into what students might do if they have the right instruction and the right support. So I don't care what you've been told about your child or your student's IQ. I would pretty much disregard it as an invalid measure of a student's potential. Another reason why I think we are compelled to presume students' competence is that we now have probably over 30 years of research showing that many people who have been given the label of mentally retarded are much more competent than anyone ever thought when they have a means to communicate, when they have high-quality instruction, when they have the right supports. The fourth compelling reason to presume competence is because to presume incompetence could result in harm to our students if we are wrong. And that at the end of the day, even if we're wrong about students' capabilities to learn general education curriculum or to communicate in ways like their same-age peers, the consequences of that presumption being wrong are not as dangerous as the alternative. So just in parting words, I would encourage you to continue to have really high expectations and hopes for your children, for your students. There are thousands of adults with Down syndrome who are having really rich lives. And for the students who are in school today, our presumption of their competence and fully including them in the rich mainstream of school life is the best way to help them reach those ideals. So with that, and with, of course, running over time, Vanessa, would you like to moderate any questions or discussion?
Absolutely. Thank you, Cheryl, for this really, really wonderful information. We did get some responses to your question.
Okay.
Could you summarize your question for us?
Yes. The question was, are people generally aware that the federal special education law says that schools need to make reasonable efforts to provide materials at the same time as other students, not 3 weeks later? So are people even aware of that? And are people finding that that's happening in practice or not?
Okay. So we did get some responses.
And funny, I don't see anything in the chat window, just FYI. But if you do, that's great.
I think that just comes to me, and unfortunately I don't know how to share that. So let me read it to you.
Okay.
We got, one individual said she did not realize that, and as a director of her local nonprofit, many of her parents do not realize that.
Ah.
Another person said that, yes, she is aware, but this does not happen easily or often in her district. Someone said, I was not aware, and this has unfortunately rarely been our experience. It seems that this is asking for the moon too often.
I think it's asking for what students are legally and ethically and educationally entitled to. And the number one way that this happens is for schools to create common planning time for students who have intensive support needs, not for each and every student, but for students who have intensive support needs and who need their materials to be modified or adapted for them in order for them to essentially have a free and appropriate public education. And Vanessa, another resource that I will send to you via email is it's a paper in which there are a whole bunch of suggestions for how to create that common planning time for students' IEP teams. My recommendation is that teams, general ed teacher, paraprofessional if there's one involved, speech pathologist, special ed teacher, at a minimum, they need an hour a week of common planning time in order to talk about what is going to be upcoming in the teacher's lesson plans, so that there's enough time for people to prepare adaptive materials. And I know all kinds of schools with all kinds of challenges and configurations that when they have had the commitment to do that, to create that time, they have been able to do it. So I will send you some of those suggestions, Vanessa, and you can post them for the group.
Thank you. That would be great.
You're welcome.
Moving on to questions. Let's see. Let me remind everybody that this will all be posted on ndss.org. We're going to get all that information, including all these resources that have been mentioned, posted within the next day. It will absolutely be up. We've just got to gather everything, process the video, and get that up there for you. So please spread the word. Okay, so moving on to questions. Oops, popped away. Okay, is there a book with ideas for teachers, para, administrators on accommodations for curriculum in the general education classroom?
Yes, there are several. I will send you a list with links to where to find them. Okay,
wow.
Vanessa?
That is, wow, you are incredible.
I
okay.
mean, there's a whole bunch of them, and they're very accessible to families and teachers. So yes, I'll send you a list.
Is this something you recommend that parents could purchase on their own and provide to teachers?
Absolutely, absolutely,
okay.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I don't want. Parents are kids' best advocates. Passionate teachers are kids' best advocates. And I think the more that parents can sort of know what's out there and be able to provide resources, and vice versa, the better. So absolutely.
All right. We've got a question here. The principal tells me that my daughter has to prove it at school in order to be promoted to first grade, or she will hold her back in kindergarten.
Well, what does that parent think? Does that parent think that she wants her child to go to first grade, or?
Excuse me. This was submitted in two different portions, and I read the second first. Here we go. So principal tells me that my child cannot read because she does not read in school, but she reads hundreds of books at home. The principal tells me that my daughter has to prove it at school in order to be promoted to first grade, or she will be held back. So it's about the reading.
Oh boy, let me share a couple of ideas with you. There is research that is not very favorable on retention of students. In other words, like the research doesn't show that kids do a heck of a lot better if they're retained, except in the very, very, very early grades, like kindergarten or first grade. So research-wise, there may be a rationale for retaining that child. Now, what I would do is I would videotape your child at home showing her reading and then talking about what she's read or using whatever way she communicates to talk about the book that she's read or whatever she's reading. And third, I would want some real dedicated problem solving with you as part of the problem solving group about why your daughter's not reading in school. Is she too anxious? Is she, does she not have the right books? Is she not being given the right reading support? Does she need a different physical environment? Like maybe sitting in a chair at her desk reading is not best for her. Maybe she would do better reading in a beanbag chair. So, I mean, I think, I don't know, I don't think there's any legal recourse or legal precedent that would allow you to challenge that principal's statement that your child needs to prove reading, but I might suggest kind of approaching it from a problem-solving standpoint with the rest of the team members to figure out, what support she needs in order to read at school.
Fabulous. Well, Cheryl, we've run out of
I know.
Here. We've done so many comments on how helpful and great this presentation has been. So thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge with everybody here. It's really
You're very welcome.
I know that everybody looks forward to the resources that we're all going to put up on the site once Cheryl and I are able to gather everything together and get it up on the website. It'll be at ndss.org for all of those who logged on to the webinar and who registered for the webinar. You'll also be getting an email with a reminder of where that information can be found. So again, Cheryl, thank you so much, and I hope you and everybody else have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.